Happy Friday. Happy Friday indeed. All right, good. Luke. Nuno, Naveen, Yogi, Vijay, Dhruv, Mr. Jaggery, Mr. Paul. Hey, gents, while we wait to get started, Dhruv, welcome. Thanks for coming. That was a very quick turnaround to you joining the meeting. Very much appreciated. Happy to have you here. Help me enunciate your first name because I just got it wrong. Hello. All right. Good morning, Gunjan. You know? Okay. Okay, we're about 3 minutes after. We've got a fair number of folks here. A couple of others that'll likely join as we get going. It is Friday, April 3rd. Just as a quick reminder to everyone, the meetings are recorded and publicly posted out on YouTube. There's a community channel out there where we've got recordings going back about as far as a year now, a little over a year. At some point, we need to identify Meshery's birthday and do a little celebration. Yeah, it's kind of hard to believe it's been that long. I'm pleased that Yogi's on the call today. He was maybe on the first ever community call. If I have to go back and look. But there's got to be something special for sticking it out that long.
Yes, I was on that first call.
Yeah, yeah. How we want, yeah. It's kind of like early project sponsors or early sponsors of a company, or what have you. You don't forget your first. You don't forget your first. Dhruv. Shit. Yogi, help me out, man. Is it Dhruv or Dhruv? And don't make me take your Indian badge off the front of your shirt if you can't pronounce it correct. All right, good. All right, so hopefully let's skip past the bad jokes. I think Luke, you're familiar with those already, so we don't need any more of them. In the chat in the Google Meet is a link to the meeting minutes. Please jump in, pop in your name. Some of you are sick of hearing me say that the meeting minutes are a collaboration, just like the 3 projects that we have going on here. Before we get going, I'll say one more time. I know not all of you are in a position to that you're in a good position to have audio, but Dhruv, if you are in a position to have to speak, it would be great for you to introduce yourself as a way of putting you on the spot. And I'm not sure if he's still with us. Is he? Yeah, he is. Okay. You might not be able to talk at the moment, so that's okay. Okay, good. Hey, one thing that I do a bad job of is encourage. Well, actually, I guess I probably do this every time. Is encouraging everyone to Pop in any topics that you're going to want to discuss today. Just as a quick reminder, for those that haven't been on these calls for a whole year, that right now we have 2 calls a week. One is the community call that we're on right now. We talk about any number of things. A lot of things happening in service mesh land out there in the general ecosystem, and a lot of things happening within the projects that this community stewards. And so a broad, so a lot of folks invited to this call. The more the merrier, the more varied the topics, almost the better. There's a second call that happens on Wednesdays, about an hour earlier than the current time. And it's a development call, so we generally focus on design specs or doing demos, working through issues. We've in a very good way grown as a community, to the extent that there's a few things that need to be changed around to ensure that we scale a little better. One of those is probably spinning up a third meeting, a working group meeting, kind of a working stream, if you will, a work stream. And that one is probably to be focused on the whole collection of functionality around performance management. And the notion that there's a relatively new Slack channel in the Slack account called Performance. We're going to try to give a fairly hard push there. That was certainly one of the topics that myself and Pratik, another member of the community, we're going to be on stage at KubeCon talking about, and it looks like we'll do that hopefully in August. And by the time that we do, I'm very much so hoping that we're able to represent a few new insights, a few new bits of research, and a few new features. I am trying to recall, I don't think that on this call we talked about the Envoy project and a couple of the maintainers of Nighthawk as being fairly interested in one of the Google Summer of Code proposals that some individuals in this community have put forth. So it's worth calling out here that in part the formation of that working group, and we need to find a day and a time. And by the way, this call is not about me talking the whole time. So jump in at any moment. We need to find a day and a time here. And then part of the reason that we would be spinning up that working group is we've got enough folks here who are capable of moving this forward. And I say Nighthawk also. We've gotten a response from that community, which has been positive. And we're also looking at this other technology, a different load generator, Vegeta. Both of these are load generators. We don't necessarily have to go into detail on those here, but it's in part based on their response that it's time to move forward with adding a third load generator to Meshery. The currently supported ones are Fort.io and WRK2. And there's reasons why people might want to use one versus the next, but neither of them does Meshery run in a distributed way. Meshery will run a single instance of these load generators and do performance testing. Our hope is that we'll work toward building out a framework of doing distributed performance testing or distributed load generation. Hitting endpoints from various vectors and coalescing those results and making Meshery a much more powerful performance management tool. Kush, it strikes me that you might have, if you have handy either the link to, there's a couple of issues that we're tracking, one for Vegeta and one for out there on the Envoy repo. If you have those links handy, pop them in if you would. But suffice to say, this will be a point of a kind of additional focus and work within the community. There'll be a few design specs as well. I guess this is a good time to ask. Kush, I know you were working on some thoughts around a design spec for distributed performance testing here. Is that at a point by which you're looking for commentary from the community here? There it is. Yep, and Kush is, like some of us, audio challenged today. But Kush, if it is, yeah, please do drop in the link to the design spec that you're working on. If it's not ready, no problem. So I'm going to work through some of these announcements, and then hopefully I will stop doing the talking. So Google Summer of Code, just in terms of the time frame, has been the time frame. I think it was this last. I don't remember. The days blur together, but here recently it was, I think it was Monday or something, the deadline for project submissions, for applications, for student applications into GSOC 2020. I'm very pleased that a number of you put forth some impressive looking submissions. And I was just 2 minutes before this call, got access to the CNCF's org inside of GSOC, and was just looking at a couple of statistics that I think some of you I know might have similar access to this, because some of you are considering being a mentor, but many of you, I think, are just kind of interested in some of the statistics, or sort of how is GSOC shaping up thus far. And I'll say that in context of the timeline, I just signaled to the CNCF that we're looking for a number of slots, a number of internships, and so I think that's an active process that's going on, and that I guess the next milestone is in a few weeks. The full timeline, I think this same timeline is available to everyone, but we're requesting slots, going through making selections, announcing those student selections in about a couple months from now, or no, a month from now, exactly, almost. And some of you were, I think, kind of curious about how that was shaping up, and so I thought I would just show a statistic or two about the number of proposals that came through in that time frame for the CNCF org. So 67. Looks like a couple of them maybe didn't quite make it, but so 65 in total. And I think we've got around 36 members of the org, 33 mentors signed up for the CNCF org. So there's at least one of you, if not two of you on the call right now, who might be mentoring this year. So that's fantastic. It just so happens that the other open tab that I have is talking about mesh decks, which we don't need to talk about, but we'll be hearing more about in the coming weeks. So that's a teaser. Earlier, so Kush was asking, hey, how many slots? Earlier this morning, I sent an email saying that I was asking for at least 4 slots for the project ideas that we have submitted. So I don't have a sense, I only have a sense based on having mentored last year in terms of the likelihood of getting that number or getting more. So let me share. I realize that's a significant topic to a number of you on the call. So if I didn't trying to be as transparent as possible as soon as I get kind of info about it, but feel free to ask me additional questions if I didn't get to them all. So good. So Kush has put up a number of different of the links that we're kind of tracking around the distributed performance testing effort. Some interesting things there. I'll say that that very much related to this, that Kanichkar has a proposal out for probably our first Rust-based, our first of a couple of things. I think one Rust-based and then two WASM filter for performing a few interesting functions. One of those being the thing I just was mentioning around sort of a real-time calculation of mesh decks. Mesh decks being an implementation of the service mesh performance specification, which I expect most people aren't familiar with. But I'm going to put a link to it so you can go look. I wasn't really intending for us to kind of go through that specification.
Interestingly, when I searched for mesh decks, it came up with some.
Oh yeah,
some different company. It says develop with mesh decks. And then apparently,
it's not a clothing company, is it? It's not like a bullet.
No. I think it's definitely a web development company established in August 2017. So
no, okay. Well, I should have done a Google search first to see if that term is if we can end up as a community end up putting the little registered TM after that. I don't know. Yeah, thanks for calling that out, Yogi. We should be careful. Okay, almost done with the announcements. Some of you are quite familiar with Nick Jackson of HashiCorp. I think I've talked in this community about the partnership that we have and that Meshery has with HashiCorp. I'm just remembering there are two announcements here. And Yogi is familiar with one. And that is that if we go out to hashicorp.com/ecosystem and we take a look at the technology partners, I think this just went up yesterday or earlier this week, but there's a Layer 5 is now a technology part, a service networking platform technology partner. I think they had a little bit of a hard time trying to understand where Meshery fit, because we're not a proxy, we're not doing DNS, we're not, but when you go look at the description of our engagement, hopefully each of you will take a big breath and puff your chest out a little bit, because Meshery is now up on HashiCorp site. Now, there is one thing that we do need to go let the good folks at HashiCorp know, that in general, while Meshery does, part of its goal is to help facilitate learning of service meshes, that the term playground is something that we want to shake loose from the project. That's because it indicates to people that Meshery is a toy, and it isn't. And so, anyway, congrats to the community here for that win. Pretty neat I'm sure all of you are familiar with HashiCorp's products. And just what kind of a neat company it is. So that's a win for the community here. The second announcement, HashiCorp related, is that, again, many of you have either seen Nick Jackson on this call. He's been in the community for a while, or maybe you know him from a couple of the books that he's written, or the All Things Microservices YouTube channel that he does, which is pretty great. But Nick is also creating an open source project called Shipyard. Pretty interesting. Has the potential to become a HashiCorp product, actually. I'm foreshadowing or reading some tea leaves to guess that is a possibility. I do get a chuckle out of how they clearly riffed off of the HashiCorp logo to come up with the Shipyard one. I feel like I won't do Shipyard justice if I try to describe the project. I'm going to take a quick crack at it and say, perhaps this is a next gen Vagrant. And that doesn't do it justice because there's some interesting things that it does that Nick had only recently demoed it to me, but Nick was kind enough to quickly create a Meshery blueprint for Shipyard. So Naveen or Kanishkar or Shivai, if you have, I think I gave you guys the command to download, install, run Shipyard, and at the same time deploy the Meshery blueprint. If you have that handy, if you could put that into the meeting minutes in case folks here want to try it out, I'm sure that Nick would appreciate feedback. This is 20 hours old now, so he just did it, and it was a very basic thing. So I'm sure he knows that there's probably improvements, but I'm sure he would be encouraged if people gave him feedback. So pretty cool. So hopefully we'll be seeing more of Nick. I'd mentioned him a week or two ago as the HashiCorp folks were trying to pull him back in. He's a popular guy. Other announcements. Kush, given that your mic is in a troubled spot, maybe I'll say this on your behalf, that Kush had been working to help grease the wheels around our the community's review process for the 3 Jekyll-based sites that we run. 2 of them now are anytime. 2 of them now, the Layer 5 IO site and the Meshery IO site. Anytime that you go to submit a pull request, rather than having to check out the code and do a build yourself, there's a Netlify integration for both of those sites, wherein as you look at a given pull request, there will be a link to where that PR has been built and deployed as a preview. So there's like a per pull request preview of each of the sites. Perhaps just the briefest of examples will help. So in Meshery IO, as a site, there's a recent PR. Within that PR, there should be checks that were run, built, things that were done, and one of them here is that there's a preview deployment that people can go look at, and if you take this hyperlink, the details hyperlink, it links out to that PR's preview. I'm guessing that was PR 146. That's one piece of value that we can immediately get out of Netlify and their friendliness to open source projects. And so that's why we've got their logo down here. That just helps in the review process. So if you have questions on that, please poke Kush. So Kush, thanks for that. I think Kush, I owe you probably an answer about the robots.txt and further use of Netlify. So we'll chat about that. Okay, all right. Final thing for me to bring up, and then I'm gonna see if I can make any one of you guys bring up a topic. Last topic is, for a couple of weeks now, I've been mentioning on this call, hey, we should really get out the next minor release of Meshery. And I guess I'll use the word minor lightly because there's a couple of architectural level, because it will be a significant release. And the longer that we put it off, the bigger that release gets. I would since I've not been getting to it, I wanted to ask for a volunteer here. If anyone wanted to volunteer to be kind of the release lead for .4, and what is a release lead? What are the responsibilities involved, do you ask? Well, two things come to mind. One is just an organization of just collecting a bulletized list of features that will be accounted for, and I can help with that. The second one is ideally writing a short blog post that describes those release notes, some of the features and why they're meaningful. Anybody want to try that on? Wear that hat? You will be supported. And if no one does, I will.
Actually, wait, Shivai just volunteered in the chat.
Very good. Should be.
In the past, we've had, and a shame on me that I can't volunteer right now because I'm still trying to get back into things. But in the past, we've had extreme success when we used to rotate those roles based on releases, right? So for one release, it could be one. Because not only everyone would get acquainted to what's going on, and they'll also play multiple roles into as to documenting what those release features are, and also what has to go in, what are the timelines. So
makes a lot of sense to me. There is yeah, kind of like the rotating hat of a scrum master in some respects. Like, hey, you know, it's and then actually, so thanks for that, Yogi. Shivai, thanks for raising your hand. And then Blake, seeing that you're on the call, good to have you. We were just saying HashiCorp every which way a few minutes ago. I don't know if you were on at the time.
I don't think I was.
Okay.
Good to hear.
Yeah, no. So yeah, our first two kind of announcements up towards the top. One of them is just the work that you've been helping us get toward and begin to see publicly. So I think that there's some prideful folks on the call right now, and they're seeing Meshery up on HashiCorp.com. So that's fantastic. Also, I met with Nick Jackson yesterday, and hopefully again on this coming Tuesday. Blake sort of quickly, you know, he's got a project that he's working on. There's a couple of Blake. We should catch up. I just had this conversation with Nick yesterday. I'm hoping that we can that between him and he's suggesting maybe he's got a couple of good suggestions that I want to run by you and see if they make sense. One of those is whether or not there's to try to get one or more of the console engineers potentially involved. So.
Okay, yeah, let's chat offline. We can see how we can maybe get some resources internally to help, you know, Nick and some of the efforts that you guys have spoke about.
So actually, speaking of that, I'm not sure if Asuko is on the call now, but there are just since we're talking about this, everyone, there are, if you're not. Actually, Blake, if this might be your first time on the community call, I'm trying. If it is,
it is. Yeah.
Okay. It's a mandate. It's an obligatory. Introduce yourself. Tell everybody about Blake and.
Yeah, sure thing. So, hi, my name is Blake Covarrubias. I'm a product manager at HashiCorp, working on a console. Been at HashiCorp roughly 8 or 9 months or so. Still, I guess. Not really a newbie anymore, but prior to being at HashiCorp, I worked for a company in the cloud computing space as a product manager for OpenStack, and they did a little bit of Kubernetes. And then I spent kind of 12 years prior to that as a network engineer, actually building out and deploying wireless networks like WiMAX, LTE, and a little bit of wireline things as well. So a lot of time in the field with networking, and yeah, just now working obviously with console and service mesh and that whole space. So definitely love it. But happy to be here. I know I've been chatting with Lee a bit. We met probably a couple maybe months back now at a meetup where he gave a presentation on service mesh, and then we've been collaborating a little more. So glad to be here and be part of the wider community.
Yeah, that's fantastic. For any number of reasons, it's nice that Blake is here. If not only just to have a network nerd in the presence, so this is good. Awesome. I was just about to say that part of the effort and collaboration that Blake has been stewarding begins to show up underneath the console adapter. There are, I think if Asuko was on the call, I think he is one of the first to raise his hand to try to take on a couple of issues. So in general, if you were to describe kind of the state of the console adapter, the Meshery console adapter, it's stale, or it's fallen behind a little bit, and as such, it's not doing the best of jobs of representing the latest and greatest from console. And there are a couple of issues in here, I think, that are with respect to installation and just getting the latest version of console out, that I'm hopeful there are members of this community that can execute on those with relative haste, because that will be very meaningful to people's experience with console. And then there's a number of other enhancements to that adapter that I think that are going to be really interesting to people as they go to interface and really interface with console and see the power of its latest functionalities. I don't know how often we've talked about it on this particular community meeting, but it is a good time to say that not all of the Meshery adapters are made equal. They are, kind of coincidentally, there's a common substrate of functionality that each of them need to have. And I say somewhat coincidentally because if you compare the analog to service mesh interface, SMI, that spec, the aim of that spec is to have a lowest common denominator set of interfaces of functionality that any service mesh integrating with SMI would be capable of. That's in some respects a similar position that the Meshery adapters are in, to ensure that every adapter has at least the ability to do lifecycle management of that service mesh, to install it and remove it, to deploy a couple of sample apps, and that's about the minimum bar, if you will. It's by design and by intention that these adapters are not made equal. If they were, then folks like Blake or folks that use console and deploy console would find maybe lesser value in using Meshery to help grease part of the wheels for how it is that they're using console. If the adapter was relegated to just a smaller subset of console's full functionality, if it impeded them getting to all of console's functionality. So intentionally, the adapters are designed to allow those individual service meshes to let their differentiation shine through. And I've talked about this as an SMI maintainer. I've talked about this in that project about the need to explicitly and conscientiously allow for room to differentiate. Otherwise, each project, I know, like if I was representing a service mesh, then I might not be as inclined to go help advance the spec if all I'm trying to do is sort of commoditize myself, or just sort of, that's one way of looking at it. Anyway, that's not Meshery's intention. Meshery, and so you can see that already when you go to run the Istio adapter. It's a little more advanced than any of the other adapters at the moment, for a couple of reasons. One of those reasons is because there are a few service mesh. Well, I shouldn't say a few. Maybe if we go look at the service mesh, the service meshes that Meshery has adapters for, I think there are 3 today that are based on Istio. So one is Istio, a second one is Octarine, and a third one is the Citrix. Actually, this needs to be updated. This is the Citrix service mesh. And so consequently, there's been a bit more focus on the Istio adapter. But that doesn't need to remain to be the case. So, okay, lots of blathering on from me. Again, not the intention. Shivai, thank you for stepping up on as being the release lead there. Other topics, other things to talk through.
Could I speak a bit on the design aspect?
Yep, say that one more time.
I was saying that could I speak a bit on the design?
Yeah, please. That would be great.
Yeah, okay. So like I was just having a talk with Lee and regarding the Meshery client, and also like if we are speaking in general about the design scheme throughout, whether we're talking about the websites or just the Meshery client. So I was thinking that we can probably incorporate some of the modern design schemes. For example, having contours and having, like circular. So basically, if you have also had a look at the Facebook site, the new link, everything is somewhat, contoured, and there's a gradient involved. So there's a lot of gradient colors involved today in a lot of the modern designs. So I was just thinking that if we can also implement that in our either with the Meshery client. So I mean, what would be a response for others? Because I and Lee had a common consensus that could work out. So just wanted to discuss with the others that if we can possibly include some of the features such that the entire functionality of the application doesn't change, and it doesn't look too too flashy. So that was just my suggestion, that we can probably have a look at that. And for that, I was also planning that we can also like implement future designs on Figma. So for the free version of Figma, it allows like 2 editors at one point of time who are working on the wireframes and the designs, but others can be the viewers, and we can dynamically change between the editors and the viewers, such that, for example, if someone is working on one particular screen design, then we can just give the access to others for editing some other design. So that is like the entire idea behind this, that we can probably get started with this kind of a design scheme and try to implement that.
Yeah, and to help characterize that a little bit, the latter bit of what Shivai was talking about was more with respect to user experience, and that being that perpetually the capabilities of the project, the way that the community runs, the way that the project looks, basically all of the things that they're continually in process of transforming. Earlier on the call, we were saying it's time to spin up a working group around performance management. And that's a beautiful thing because the community is finally big enough that that makes sense. It's also a beautiful thing that there's enough functionality now and enough capable people in the community that can come and take on actually bringing an interface here that isn't confusing and is a bit more intuitive. Because this one, as an example, was us doing what we could, the community doing what they could when they could to get things done. But this, as a user experience, is marginally acceptable, or there's much need for improvement. And so Shivai is signaling that he's trying to give some thought to that, and we'll likely have a few prototypes to share with folks here. I think the first part of what Shivai was highlighting was that it was a bit of a style, subtle style improvements and tweaks, things about maybe use of gradients or some vector graphics to help modernize in some areas. Also, I think Shivai has a mind that perhaps part of the interactions should be a bit more SPA in nature, or a bit more single page application in nature. Which is to say slightly less clicky, if you will.
And we should definitely have a dark mode.
That outlines the like the user flows and the prototype, like the wireframe designs. Is that what you're saying? Or were you saying like?
So. Yeah. Just a thought that came to my mind. If you want to be hip,
Yeah.
The dark mode.
I actually misheard you. I thought you said we should definitely have a document, but
no, dark mode.
Oh, dark mode. Yeah. yeah. You know what? So, and funny that you mentioned that. I want to talk about that for a minute. Am I still? Okay. It's funny. I can't keep track of whether or not I'm sharing my screen or not, but I guess I'm not. Let me ask what you guys think about something like this. So I think Blake and I maybe talked about this. I think maybe a number of us have talked about this. That hey, it's my wild perspective that service meshes are quite a powerful component in your infrastructure, and that of what we've seen today from service meshes, we see kind of three feature pillars. One around security, one around observability and kind of monitoring, and one around traffic control or manipulation or traffic redirection. And from there, you could do some chaos engineering. From there, you could do some, given where the layer given the layer at which the service mesh sits, I think it's like there's a couple of reasons why we've been as a community focused on performance-centric things. Number one, because that's top of mind for any adopter. What does this thing cost me? I want to understand and weigh the value of what I'm getting versus. And that's actually where mesh decks will help come in, is help people give them context for weighing the value versus overhead. But there's a second reason why we've been focused on performance, and that's because as you look to potentially add maybe a fourth pillar or a fifth pillar of functionality that can be provided based on the service mesh being there, some of these get really interesting, but they're gonna cost something to do. If you're gonna, some of these look interesting because they're gonna again be real-time, network-based, new network services, if you will. And if you bring them forth and they're interesting and people use them, they need to understand that they need to be done in a performant way, and people need to understand how much overhead they would be paying for them. I realize I'm speaking in the abstract. Let me give you a very simple example of what I mean by another pillar of functionality. I'll give a very simple example. You guys can think about other things. Dark mode, light mode. Hey, dark mode, like Ant said, is pretty hip. If you have an application and it's a collection of services, that application is running on a service mesh, well, maybe you'd go to your development team and you'd say, hey, can you guys take a sprint and let's implement dark mode. And maybe that's worth it to you. Or maybe if you've got a mesh present, you'd say, you know what, forget about that. go do code change. Rather, let's just tell the mesh to switch. We'll just tell the mesh change this CSS here from what was formerly light mode. Now there's a dark mode. And so what I'm saying is you can use the mesh to actually real time update your CSS as that's happening and actually give you dark mode. The service meshes empower a few different personas, one of them being the service owner, the product manager. And if they can go over and without having to go to their developers and ask for a sprint to implement dark mode, they can use the mesh to do that. That's intriguing, and I think that that opens up additional space for service meshes to bring more value. So very long-winded response to Ant's suggestion that not only do I agree that that's kind of hip and might be a good thing to do, but as service mesh leaders, as stewards of the service mesh ecosystem, I wonder if we couldn't, I consider that it would be kind of neat to have, well, a sandbox site or a play site that lets people experience the power of a mesh. And actually by this, I mean something like, if you take a simple site like Layer 5 IO, which doesn't have dark mode today, if it was running on a mesh, visitors of the site could change to dark mode like they can any other app. But in this case, that change is actually can be implemented without code change of the website. It can be implemented as code change in the service mesh. I think that that would be a bit thought leading. I think that that would be interesting to explore the performance overhead of doing such a thing. Interesting to explore how to empower the product owner. So for my part, I'm curious. I'm interested in not only bringing dark mode, but actually bringing it outside of the app as a point of exploration, as a point of expanding people's minds. How silly of a notion does that strike some of you?
So that's definitely possible, but if I understand what you're talking about, is basically we're saying we have two different instances of the front end. One of them is built with dark mode design. The other one is the usual design, and we do traffic redirection based on whatever cookie the user has stored.
That's a good. No, but
that doesn't sound too exciting.
Yeah, no, but
what?
No, it's just saying.
I guess we can do something like there is an extension called dark mode reader, which actually inverts the color of the page. So that can be like triggered by the cookie of like whenever some developer is deploying the app, so we can inject some JavaScript code along with it or something of that sort and give an option to the user to just switch to the dark mode or light mode. Is that what you are saying, or did I also interpret it wrong?
Yeah, no, both of you guys. The difference that I'm saying is slightly nuanced, and both of those things do show off the power of a mesh, and both of them are, do help teach people about service meshes and kind of show the thing that I was articulating was actually with zero code change and only one site, only one instance of the site, is to show that a mesh can, on a per user basis, implement dark mode for you. I'm gonna leave the thought there as a tantalizing, hopefully a tantalizing thing. And also I recognize kind of a silly example, and I'm intentionally leaving it as such. But just, yeah. So anyway, +1 to dark mode. I like the idea. And I think, yeah, I think that there are opportunities around how that's brought forth. Fair enough. Any other comments on dark mode or any other topics?
I like the idea of, you know, showing off the power of the mesh on the community site itself. So that would be great. Like, maybe not the dark mode per se, but what we could probably have, like, maybe have a beta version of the site next to the main version, and then for, like, saying, if you're the adventurous type, you can try the beta version, and this is the mesh redirecting you to the beta version in the background. Sounds like that.
Anybody ever read a Choose Your Own Adventure book? Is that just a US thing? And now I'm showing my age and my ethnocentricity.
I have definitely read my fair share of those books. Many years ago, but definitely read them.
But for those that haven't, the books were, you'd be reading through the book, and then it'd ask you a question. You know, do you want to enter? Do you want to go in the right, take the right path or the left path? And if you want to take the left one, you go to chapter 4. Want to take the right path, you jump to chapter 5 or whatever. And you kind of jumped around through the book depending upon how you as a reader wanted to choose your, anyway, bad analogy, but that's what came to mind. And now I'm kind of wasting time toward the end of our call. For my part, and that resonates very well with me. That I was just talking about distancing the term playground from Meshery, and in some respects, we're talking about bringing forth a little bit of a playground. I think that there's a lot of value in that. And in just sort of a publicly hosting an instance of Meshery, we've talked about that a lot before. As a matter of fact, there's some of you, so this is actually a really good reminder that on this next coming Thursday, April 9th, there is an introduction to Istio, or I think it's to Istio, through O'Reilly. It's a live training that some of you will be helping with. I would expect that we'll have a small influx of, I keep forgetting that I'm not sharing my screen. Let me share real quick. A small influx of probably a couple hundred or more registrants for this training on Thursday. This will be a 3-hour training. Part of the training, we end up asking all of the students to come join the Slack channel. And then we end up asking them to, where is it? I thought Meshery was listed on here. We ended up, we asked them to use Meshery. We basically walked them through service mesh concepts and how Istio works using Istio sample app through the auspices of Meshery. And so just that, and so this is actually one of those examples. Blake, considering that you're here, like as we advance through that console adapter capability, I would very much like if we are giving workshops in this same fashion, and it not being an intro to Istio title. And so, my point of saying that is, maybe I'll post a link to this. If any of you happen to be around in the Slack channel on this next Thursday, around this time, and you see people asking a bunch of questions and things, that's a great opportunity for you to step in and either learn some stuff as they are, or maybe answer some questions about service meshes. So that should be happening inside the workshop channel. Anything else anybody wants to talk about?
So there was a comment by Isuku, I guess, on Kubernetes in Docker action on GitHub to implement the unit and integration tests for all the adapters in Meshery. We can, if anyone has any idea related to it, like does that work or how does the test should normally be written? I'm looking for inputs.
So to re-articulate that, Naveen is saying that, we've got a long way to go in terms of unit tests to have all of the Go code covered. And as we go to do that, there's some choices maybe to be made about the approach to unit testing and the framework that's used. Anybody, if anyone's had a focus there in the past, now is the time to speak up. I know Asuko just wrote a unit test for the linker D adapter. And he used Go test there. But anyway, maybe I should ask it like this. Anyone have an objection to using the standard library, kind of the standard Go test approach to unit testing for the project?
No objections.
Nice. Okay. Well, top of the hour, top of the morning to some of you. I'm going to go top off my coffee. Go make some other bad jokes somewhere else. Yeah, very good. Cheers. Cheers, Ann. All right, fair enough. I'll see each of you in Slack. Talk to you guys soon. Bye, all.
Bye.
Yeah, bye.
Bye, Blake. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.